Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Leader Spotlight for the BALC. My name is Jim Hoko, and I'm the Executive Director for the Behavior Analyst Leadership Council. Behavior Analyst Leadership Council is a trade organization. We were founded in 2015. We've done multiple conferences in the Northeast. We tried to go to Boston, but the pandemic hit, and we are scheduled and will be going to Miami in 2022. We are committed to supporting behavior analysts serving as leaders, as managers, and as business owners. And we support a triad of excellence, which involves effective leadership, clinical acumen, and operational expertise. So I'd like to, at this time, introduce our speaker, Deb Napolitano. Deb is an assistant professor in applied behavior analysis at Damon College. She's an adjunct professor with the Golisano Institute for Developmental Disability Nursing at SFJ. And she's the legislative chair of the New York State ABA organization. And last but not least, she is one of our BALC board members. That's a mouthful to say. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Deb.
Thank you.
Hi, Deb.
Hi, how are you?
I am doing great today, and how are you?
I'm good, thank you. It's beautiful. It's sunny here outside of Rochester, New York, and a little chilly, but good.
I was about to ask, where are you in Rochester, New York? So, you know,
I'm in between Rochester and Syracuse. It's kind of no man's land in this spot in between.
I'm sure it's a nice area. Now, the first question that I've been asking lately is how is Rochester, New York doing on the vaccine distribution?
We are doing pretty amazing, I think. We're waiting for persons for the eligibilities to change, because there's actually been times where there's been vaccines available the next day and there's open slots. So I'm really looking forward to the continued change in the vaccine eligibility. One of the things that I do, because I try to do some community work here in my own community, is I'm tuned into vaccine availability across the region. And so I post almost daily updates on where there's vaccine openings for eligible folks, and so they're doing pretty good, I think, and we just need to keep moving in the right direction.
That's great. Yeah, hopefully we're going to be, in some place that's resembling a little bit more normal in months to come. This has been, quite a challenging situation. And it's interesting to hear you say that. I hear that you're involved in a lot of things, but let's start by just talking, this is about leadership and about how you become leaders and who you are. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, your schooling, your interests, grad school, whatever.
Sure. So I started in the field, really, I started as a direct care staff and really to put myself through school. So one of the things that I really feel that I bring to the table is an understanding of what many of the direct support professionals or direct care staff really what they experience. And for me, that's invaluable. And what I learned in that work was how important good services were. And I had the great opportunity to meet a behavior analyst who really helped shape my career choice. I had no intention of grad school, much less a PhD. But one of the things that really opened my eyes was how amazing our science is and how we could help persons using the science. So, we sat down one day and she said, well, you're going to grad school. And I said, okay, I'm going to grad school. I'll go for my master's so I can come back and get a leadership position here where I was working in Connecticut. And she said, well, you're going to Kansas. So we called the person who was listed in the ABAI was so small at the time that they had this little brochure. This was 30 years ago, something like that. They had a little brochure and they had listed the contact people in there. And so we called Alita Cooper, who was my master's advisor, and we talked to her, and she amazingly actually answered the phone because she's so busy. She was rarely in her office. And I went out for a visit, fell in love, and you know, the one thing that I did say that really relates to the work that I'm doing now as an advocate is that I said to Alita, you know, I work with persons with developmental disabilities, and particularly adults. I had no experience with kids, and she ran the preschool. And so I said, you know, I don't know if this makes sense for me to come there because I don't want to work with typical kids. I want to work with persons with disabilities. And she said, Debbie, you need to know how to work with kids who don't have differences to be good at working with persons who do. You need to understand typical development. And she convinced me, and I went.
That's a great story. And I particularly like it. You know why, because we've talked about this before, is I had a similar experience and I ended up going to KU and I knew Alita Cooper and a bunch of other people. My hero that got me pointed to this field, that her name was Karen Finello. It's now Karen Bush. And Karen, if you're out there, I hope you're doing great and thank you very much. And she gave me basically the same kind of thing. You should go to Kansas, and then pointed me in that direction. I was originally going to be like this famous news reporter like Geraldo Rivera, for those of you who are older out there and you don't know about that. But fortunately, that got a little changed. So I'm just wondering, before we move on, who is this hero, this person that you spoke to that pointed you to KU?
Thank you for asking. Her name is Dina Sachs, and she went to Columbia with Doug Greer. So when Doug Greer was a keynote at Nice Aba one year, I said, well, you know, you probably don't know this, but you're ultimately responsible for me being a behavior analyst, because he was her advisor.
All right. So I want to get to Nice Aba. Is that how we say it, Nice Aba?
Yeah.
That's a nice little term that we use for the NYSABA. I want to get there because I think the political situation is very interesting. By the way, I didn't share this with you, but this is the first time that I tried to put an ad out for a leader spotlight where it got rejected. Facebook rejected my ad to talk to you because of the political nature of it. And I would have had to put together, you know, some disclosures and things. And I didn't know how to do it. So hopefully
I know all too well about
fix
those.
that and advertise this out a little bit later. But let's talk about your primary job as a professor. How do you like working in university or universities? Because I saw two positions.
Yeah, I really enjoy my position. When we came, my husband and I came to Rochester, I was a professor at the University of Rochester, and it's a really large medical school, and it was wonderful. I had the opportunity to make amazing and wonderful friends and contacts in the area, but do a lot of work locally. But the ability to really teach the future generation of behavior analysts was something that I really cared a lot about. And so one of my good friends and colleagues from the University of Kansas started this program not that long ago, several years ago, at Damon College in behavior analysis. And I was really fortunate. She brought me on board, and I have really enjoyed being a professor there, an assistant professor there. We have usually every year a cohort of about 6, 7, or 8 in-person students, but we have a really large online cohort. So that's been probably my greatest challenge, is learning how to be an effective educator online.
Yes, that's been a challenge, and I can imagine it probably pivoted somewhat when the pandemic hit. Can you tell us a little bit about how you did that, or how the universities did that?
So in terms of our program, we were really lucky because we already have so much of our programming online that it was really just a matter of pivoting our in-person students to the online format. And so that was actually not that difficult. What's been a little more difficult for me, just in terms of my effective teaching, is that we're doing hybrid right now, because for our in-person students, because for good reason. Some people aren't comfortable being in person yet. Not everybody's vaccinated. And so we're teaching a group of individuals both online. So I have several online and several in person, and really being an effective educator with that dynamic has been really challenging for me. It's been a fun challenge though, having to identify activities that we can collaborate on for the whole class, even though some are on the computer and some are in person. But overall, I think our program was really fortunate. We transitioned well. But I have a lot of people that I really care a lot about, that I've had the opportunity to become close with because of my advocacy work in the area, locally and statewide. And those are the persons that I've been most worried about. The pandemic has not been easy. We know for families who have persons living in their home, either children or adults who happen to have intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it's made educational opportunities so much more difficult. It's made, there's been real difficulty in accessing any day services. And so that's been where the challenge really has been for a lot of people in our area.
All right, so I do want to talk about kind of like what the heck's going on with behavior analysis in New York State. But before we get there, how did you move from somebody who didn't even know about behavior analysis to somebody who's representing the Committee on Legislation for the entire state of New York? How did that happen?
It's a shaping process. When I went to grad school, I really didn't know anything about behavior analysis except that I knew it works. But I had the opportunity to have some amazing, incredible mentors, Alita among them, but Barbara Etzel, Judy LeBlanc, Don Baer. I'd be really remiss in not mentioning my two PhD advisors, Jan Sheldon and Steve Schroeder. And, I really learned, I think, especially from Jan Sheldon and Steve Schroeder, about advocacy and really speaking up for people who needed help. And so I always had.
I'm sorry, just want to interject. You're talking about all those people, Jan Sheldon, Jim Sherman, Judy LeBlanc, Don Baer, Barbara Etzel, what a wonderful woman. Did you realize when you went there, because I did not, that you were in the midst of a mecca of behavior analysis for an age?
I only knew that my mentor, Dina, thought that I should go to Kansas because it was a great place to go. I had no clue. There was a program that we referred to in teaching language called the Guest Sailor Bear program. And it's like, I think it's 1969 or 70, something. And I honestly thought that those were words that we were supposed to teach. Yes, sailor and bear. I had no idea that the bear was Don Baer and Doug Guest and Wayne Saylor. And so I knew nothing about what behavior analysis was.
So I have
how lucky I was.
I was in the same place. I have to tell you a story. So I was a Judy LeBlanc, Barbara Etzel student for the first couple of years. Then I switched over to Don Baer. And when I switched to Don Baer, it was quite a shock because there were so many people that wanted to talk to Don. And he had appointments. He would put up a sheet of paper, like a piece of notebook paper on his door, if you remember that. And he put it up on Thursdays. And so all these graduate students would be hiding around to wait for him to put it up. And then they'd rush the door to put their names on it. Do you remember that?
Always. Yeah.
All right, we could go off on this all day, but let's talk about NYSABA. Yeah. Now, we had been waiting for years and years to get a license for behavior analysis. I remember in graduate schools, and so New York State got its license, and it did something a little different. You want to tell people who don't know what they did?
Absolutely. It really became a license to fix an insurance problem, is the way we describe it. So, we were really fortunate. Many of us know the work that folks at at Autism Speaks, like Laura Unum and Judith City have done to get insurance for autism treatment, and always, very clearly, always included behavior analysis as one of the services. And now they've been successful in getting that done in 50 states. And New York was one of them. And we did not have a license. And New York, being the state that New York is, very clearly said, even though the insurance law had board certification and behavior analysis in it, the state education department, which acts very differently than probably any other state education department and has a lot of oversight, said, well, you can't use that insurance if you're a family trying to hire a behavior analyst because they don't have a license. And so we had a problem, obviously, in New York, where we had maybe 70 people who could fulfill the insurance mandate now, who had PhDs and also were licensed in psychology. Most people don't realize that probably technically behavior analysts before the license were practicing psychology without a license. The psychology law, licensing law, is broad enough that it's inclusive of the work that behavior analysts do. So now we have this insurance law, then we are told we can't fulfill that insurance law. And so we had a really strong advocate in Assembly Leader Morelli, who's now Congressman Morelli, who I adore more than I can even talk about. And he really championed that and said, well, we're going to get you a license then. We're going to fix this. And I think, my guess is he expended an awful lot of professional capital to get us that license. It's a pretty, politics is politics. You don't want to see it up close. It's the sausage making. And he really worked very hard at getting us that license. And something that never happens in New York, we were able to get a license very quickly after that. But there was a lot of backdoor kinds of discussion, and I learned a lot through that process about how this works. And he ultimately said, we're only able to get you this license for autism. We came back and said, okay, if we can only get autism, can we get autism and related disorders? Because we knew that that would then open up the door again for many more opportunities for people to receive the services. And he said, yes. And then we also said, and we need our own board. We're not going to be under psychology. So he got us our own board. He got us the related disorders language. And even though we were very concerned about what was going to happen, there was nothing we could do. It was moving forward. And so
wait, Deb, I'm sorry. I gotta pause you right here.
Yeah.
Because when I first heard that, I just thought that was crazy. Because when I learned to be a behavior analyst, we were going to save the world. There's nothing, no area that we couldn't take hold of. So why in the world would it be restricted just to autism? How did that happen?
Well, it was because of the insurance, because the state ed essentially and the chairs of the higher education committees in the Assembly and the Senate said, we get it. We know you need to fix this insurance issue, but we don't think they should have a license. So we're going to give you the fix, essentially. So it literally is a license to fix an insurance issue. And so when we got the related disorders piece added and the board piece added, we at least felt like we were able to accomplish a little bit. But then state ed came in and regulated out the related disorders. They said, oh, that's just because the DSM is changing. So that would just mean that if you had PDD, that you'd be included in that. So they even took away any of that ability to, because they're very powerful in terms of their regulatory power in New York. They were able to remove even the intent of the related disorders piece in the license. So it literally was a fix to an insurance problem.
So just to be clear, so I am licensed in Connecticut, in a few other states, including New York. Mm-hmm. In Connecticut, I could come in and provide services to somebody with emotional disorders, for example. Yep. But when I walk across that state line, I'm no longer qualified to do what I could do in Connecticut.
Exactly.
So what's going on? Let's move into more recent times. Like, what's the plan for NYSABA? What do you have? This is about leadership lead. Let's see what are we going to do?
Yeah, lead. So we have been working on this since the actual implementation of the license to fix this problem. I'm not sure that people realize how significant of a problem this is. And, you know, there's a lot to getting legislation passed. And I've learned so much about how to get legislation passed and why it's so important. I've actually become politically active in many other ways because of this work. But it's really about coalition building. It's about relationship development. It's about identifying the reinforcers for the folks that have the power to change the legislation. And so for 5 years now, 5 solid years, we've actually had bills introduced in the Senate and the Assembly in New York, but they've never made it onto the agenda of the Higher Education Committee. So the gatekeeper is the chair of the Higher Education Committee, because this is a higher education bill. So we have sponsors. We have the leader of the Assembly is our Assembly sponsor, and we have an incredible senator who's an extremely strong advocate in the Senate as our bill sponsor. But they introduce the bills, and there they sit. They don't make it onto the agenda. And so what we've had to do over the last 5 years is build understanding, one of what behavioral analysis is, which has taken a very long time. We've had to build our relationships with the legislators so that they knew and trusted that what we were saying was important. We've had to connect our legislation to issues that they care about. So, for example, we've worked with the advocates for the aging, and then tried to connect that to the chairs of the aging committees. We've worked with the chairs of the children and family committees, and I've actually had the opportunity to help them shape some of their legislation because of the relationships we've developed related to evidence-based intervention related to trauma. So we've really developed these relationships, and most recently we've had an extremely amazing advocate who was just elected to the Senate, who became the head of the newly formed Developmental Disability Senate Committee. And so all of these folks care deeply about individuals in our state, and we've had to really help them understand why this is part of what needs to be part of their agenda to move this forward. But unfortunately, we are still in the space where it still has to be put on the agendas by the chairs of those committees.
Okay. You know, we're getting close to the end of our time, but this is, I know it's cool talking about all of this, but I want to focus in on your leadership. How do you feel about achieving what you've achieved? And I know you probably have a lot more, but you know, how you put yourself personally in a leadership position. How do you feel about that?
I didn't think about it that way. Honestly, I really think about it as preserving what I care so much about is a field that I treasure, because I know that behavioral analysts truly can save the world. And it just is just, I feel like I had such a wonderful opportunity to learn from the most amazing folks ever in our field. And I feel like it's really been part of the driver is I feel like I'm saving it for them to preserve their legacy, because if we don't fix this, it's really going to be bad. It already is bad for our field in New York and for people. And so it's just what we do.
So let's just talk generally about, you know, what advice would you give people who want to become leaders, maybe even want to become leaders in the political realm? I know, you know, it's not always very comfortable getting up and giving testimony or things like that, but, you know, I didn't prep you for this question, but what advice would you provide to people who want to get involved and maybe want to get involved on the political standpoint?
I would love if there are folks that want to get involved in the political area, because I think behavior analysts either working for or being elected themselves to leadership positions is one of the most important ways that we can ensure that that we can really provide ongoing the services that we need, but also shape the future of our local government, our state government, and our federal government. I've learned the power of legislation, and that is huge. And so if folks want to become active, I would recommend several things. One is start looking up some of the people who are your representatives first, and see what things they care about, and identify whether any of those resonate with you. And if you think that, you know, having a conversation with some of their staff, you may not get a conversation with the legislator themselves, and that's okay. Don't be dissuaded. But just having a conversation with some folks who maybe work for that person, start to connect with them on social media. One of the places that I have found social media to be huge, at least in New York, because New York's very progressive, maybe that's why, but Twitter, there's a lot of politics on Twitter. And I've made connections just from my advocacy on Twitter with people, and people that I feel so strongly about in terms of their advocacy and the work that they're doing. And so that's another place, is to really start to identify people who have some of the same beliefs that you do, some of the things you care about, and really look at what's going on locally, because politics really does start locally. And are there things locally that you care about? Start going to your town board meetings, or whatever your local government is, because once they start to see your face, they know you care. And you know, and the pandemic has done some good things. You know, it's made meetings like that accessible. It's so much is now streamed that you can actually go to these meetings without leaving your house in a lot of cases. So I would highly recommend that. And I just learned about I don't know why I didn't know this, but I just learned last week about behavior analysis social responsibility, and that there's a whole piece of political advocacy. So join them, and I just did. So, so I'm really excited about knowing that there's a home in my profession for my politics.
Well, Deb, it's been great talking to you again. And Deb is a board member of BALC. You know, we are going to collaborate with both NYSABA and some other organizations, you know, to try to further things. I want to emphasize some of the things Deb had said, and just urge anybody out there, if you have not, you know, taken that step to move yourself along in terms of leadership or getting involved politically, reach out to me, reach out to Deb, reach out to whoever. You know, people are very willing to talk to you. It doesn't matter if they're very well known or not well known. They're very willing to talk to you and help in whatever ways they can. And I know Deb and I and the rest of BALC and NYSABA are as well. So Deb, any last words?
One last word is I want to thank BALC and everybody else who helped to make World Behavior Analysis Day a reality. And you know, that came out of one of my colleagues on the legislative committee, Elizabeth Drago, had an idea, and it came out of that idea, and it became this wonderful thing. And so I just want to thank everybody who was related to that, and just that's a wonderful example of taking an idea and running with it.
Yes, Elizabeth, thank you. And we have a day now. That's great. All right, Deb, thank you very much. I'm going to go ahead and sign off from the BALC. Thank you for attending, and stay safe and be well, everybody. Take care.